All right, welcome to another episode of the Aspiring VC podcast. For today's meta episode, I am here with my colleague, Jason Allen, who also works at MassVentures. But before we get into anything too technical, the question that most listeners want to hear, Jason, Dunkin' and Starbucks, which one and why?
Starbucks. I like Starbucks primarily because of the variety of options. Dunkin' has a lot of great options. I just really enjoy the Starbucks experience. So hopefully, I don't make my father-in-law upset by saying that.
Well, you have upset me, as you know, I'm a huge Dunkin' fan, but I
Yeah,
understand the Starbucks is good quality. Uh,
Starbucks is great quality, and Dunkin's is great too. It's just a different style.
exactly. So okay, let's do like a little 2 minute summary. Who are you? What's the firm, the role, and everything?
Sure. So Jason Allen, I'm a vice president at MassVentures. I've been there for just over 2 years. Prior to MassVentures, I was at Launch Capital as an associate, which was a great experience. And then before that, I was in the startup and tech ecosystems here in Boston at companies like Ovia Health, LogMeIn, Ativio, and Custom Made. Before that, I was not in tech at all. I was in law and divinity. And we can talk a lot more about that, but probably not for this podcast.
That's awesome. I think a truly unique background and just an amazing story. So, um, for any of the listeners that don't already know, can we explain a little bit about like Mass Ventures? The history of the firm. Some of the companies.
Sure.
Best
Sure, yes.
practices and everything.
Um, Sorry to interrupt there, Matt. MassVentures has been around for 42 years, founded in 1978 by state charter as an evergreen investment fund. That means that we reinvest the profits after we have an exit, an IPO or an acquisition. It all started actually with a $2 million grant from the Economic Development Administration under the Department of Commerce, and it's just evolved into more of a traditional venture capital fund. We have been typically generalists by nature, so our average check size is about $300,000. We do, 2 to 3 new investments per year. We reserve 3 times that for follow-on financing. Recently, we focused a little bit more on deep tech, and I could dive more into that, but think of materials, nanotech, micro elements, quantum computing, AI, ML, that kind of stuff. So it's been really exciting this past year, learning more about technologies that are outside of the traditional ones like software and SaaS. But it's really exciting to be here. We also have a grant program, which I'm happy to dive into if that makes sense. Really quickly, it's a grant program for companies that have received SBIR or STTR phase 2 or equivalent financing. It's called the START program. I think we just had the applications kick off. I'm a START reviewer, so I review those applications. So it's really exciting to see the new technologies that are out there today. So we've been in the ecosystem here in Massachusetts for a long time, one of the earliest VC firms in the country, and still going strong.
No, that's awesome. And yeah, I think now would be a good time if there's any additional details you want to provide on the venture and the grant programming and the accelerator activities and anything else you want listeners to be aware of.
So in terms of the venture program, it's just like any other venture capital firm. It's just a pre-seed and seed stage firm, and we do early stage investments. The big thing is we really try to partner with the founders at an early stage and get them to grow, all the way through Series B. Often ask for a board observer seat or board seat, but we're really involved. And I think we like to think of ourselves as being on the same side of the table as the entrepreneur as they go through their funding journey. In terms of the START program, I think it's one of the most successful programs of its type in the country. We started it in 2012, and we had some really great companies come through that program, such as Ginkgo Bioworks, which is doing really well, Clear Motion, which is a spinoff out of MIT, and then most recently, Kitapin, which is a company that was also an MIT spinout. And so we've had a really great history there. I think those companies have gone on to raise at least over a billion or $1.5 billion in addition to the START funding. So it's a great program for that. And then we have another program called MassVX, which is a technical entrepreneurship program. And and Matt, help me out with this. Actually, it pairs entrepreneurs or operators with technical founders to help them kind of take their businesses to the next level. Oftentimes when you're dealing with technical founders or even first-time founders, you need a network of mentors and advisors that'll help guide them, especially in those earliest stages. I like to think that there's not a lot of difference between a startup, a tech startup and a new restaurant. A lot of those restaurants fail in the first 6 months to a year, and a lot of startups fail as well. And the difference is the people that are around them and the mentors that are around them. So I think we, have a three-pronged approach that can help all companies and startups in Massachusetts, whether it's highly technical or it's more software. No matter what it is, I think we have a program for most of those companies. We also have a loan program called the RLF loan program, which is essentially a revenue-based loan, and that is not specifically focused on deep tech or any particular industry. As long as they're Massachusetts-based, we can talk more about that as well.
Yeah, and real quick, I guess, do we want to hit on just like Catalyst and then the difference between like the deep tech versus the MLSC seed fund?
Sure, sure, Matt. You're putting me on the spot here of my memory here. So we also have the Massachusetts Catalyst program, which is the basically a grant program for companies that are in the energy space. I think it's about a $60,000 grant. We have it a couple times per year. Some really great companies have come through that. Some recent companies that I know that have been successful there, include Transera, Alloy Enterprises is another one. So these are all great companies that have come through the Catalyst program, and our colleague Priya Yadav really manages that well. And then we also our colleague Vineet Najiwan manages the MLSC Seed Fund, which is a basically an early stage investment vehicle for the Mass Life Science Center, and they're focused on companies that are life science companies that are looking to grow in 9 areas across the Commonwealth. I don't remember all the names of those cities and towns off the top of my head, but basically companies that are outside of Boston, outside of Cambridge. So, north, west, central, and south of Boston, where those companies are looking to grow. And I think they invest an average of $250K per organization.
And, I do want to get into your origin story, but before we do that, I just kind of had this idea based off everything that we just talked about that, there's so much going on at MassVentures. And then you think broader out into the state, it's so amazing what is set up here in Massachusetts. And there, people like Brad Feld, I think he has that startup communities book, and there's a lot of literature out there about building, these startup and innovation ecosystems. But it seems like Massachusetts just has done this amazing job of being the fertile ground for innovation. And what do you think are some of the things about the state that work so well in all these different areas?
That's a good question. I think the big thing is we have so many universities and so much innovation within those universities. I don't know how many universities are in the state of Massachusetts, but I know that when I first got here a long time ago, back in 2007, 2008, I saw at least 3 universities on the way from the airport to where I was staying. And I think that is a big part of it. There's a nice balance of people who are graduate students and PhDs working on new technologies, along with some really successful tech companies and executives and a network of angel investors who are willing to put money into those companies. So what do I mean by that? You have a lot of these senior level executives at publicly traded companies, Car Gurus, Log Me In, and later stage startup companies like Drift, public companies like HubSpot. All of these companies have executives and people who want to see the innovation ecosystem grow. And you couple that with so many colleges and universities that are trying to nurture that ecosystem, like the Babsons of the world, obviously, the Harvards and MITs, but also, UMass Lowell has some great opportunities, and WPI as well. So you put all that together, and I think that is one of the reasons why there's so many successful startups that come out of Boston, so many successful startups that come out of Massachusetts.
Definitely. And I think as, I don't know if you would agree with this, but maybe as other states try and replicate what's here, it's like, you can't do it with capital alone. You have to build some of these support ecosystems. And so maybe some of it is starting with, expanding resources on the university and education front. And then some of it can be attracting, private capital to come in alongside public capital as well.
Yeah, I think the big thing is creating a capital stack, and I think it's happened organically here. So there's something for every entrepreneur here in Massachusetts, depending on what stage you're in, whether you have a services business, a food business, or a tech company or a biotech company. There are different regions and people and systems that can help you accelerate your growth depending on what you're trying to do. And I think, again, it's happened organically here. So I don't know if there's a blueprint that can be followed, but essentially whenever an entrepreneur has success, that entrepreneur wants to continue to develop and grow that. So like, for example, DraftKings recently went public, and I know a lot of those folks who were on the uh, early employees of DraftKings want to be out in the ecosystem and start investing and also start finding companies that are similar. And I think that's how you see that type of growth. So it's informal on one hand, and then from a state perspective, from MassVentures perspective, we have a ton of resources around loans, grants, and investment, and public-private partnerships. I know Mass CEC had an opportunity earlier this year where they partnered with investment funds to do a convertible note into some companies. So there's opportunities to do that all across. It just, the entrepreneur has to take the time to do the research and connect with the right people.
Definitely. Yeah, and it is just again, it is just kind of amazing to see how all the pieces come together here. It's truly unique, but it's definitely something that over enough time, it does seem like success begets success. Like you said, when you have one company with an exit, now you have a bunch of people who are looking to maybe invest some of the capital they've gained from that and build up other ventures.
Yeah, I mean, just to keep pulling on that thread. So just to give you some context, and maybe we'll get into my origin story, but like, when I got here, it was just before just before the financial crisis, right? So 2008, and I was living in Cambridge, near Lechmere, and in that area, I don't think HubSpot was there quite yet. Maybe HubSpot was in another part of the state. Log Me In, which moved down to Boston, was still in Woburn. And so that area, if you're familiar with the Lechmere area in Boston, it was like in Cambridge rather, you have the mall, and then you have a bunch of food shops, right? And there wasn't a ton of organic companies there. Over time, if you go there now, you see a ton of, I think TripAdvisor's over there, Zipcar. You have companies like Custom Made, where I started working. You have other companies over there that, over the course of 10 years or so, all of that innovation has come to just that little street on First Street in Cambridge. So that's happening throughout the state. And so I think when you see that level of success with these companies, you want to pay it forward as well. I think there's a little bit of that in the entrepreneurs here in Massachusetts. I just see so many of them wanting to pay it forward.
Definitely. And I think on both sides of the table, whether the entrepreneur or the VC side, I think that is how a lot of people kind of build their careers and get ahead. It's actually not by taking a win-lose scenarios, but a many repeated win-wins, and kind of rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed. To be clear, again, we'll probably talk a little bit more about this, but again, if you go back to that time, maybe that wasn't necessarily the way that people thought, but now that we've had a new generation of workers come into the workforce, and people can go on social media and talk about the experience that they've had with you, I think it's certainly changed the way that people interact, and I think that's a good thing for the most part.
Definitely. So, I think this would be a good time to dive into your origin story. How
Sure.
you found your way to MassVentures and kind of the prior experiences you were doing, and
I'm talking about the very beginning, like it was a dark and stormy night, and I was in Inglewood, California, or am I going like when I first got to Boston?
Yeah, we can. I don't know. I'll see wherever you want to start it.
Okay.
I'll leave it up to you.
We'll start in the great state of Ohio. Some of you in Massachusetts might be familiar with that state. Ohio, I went to college at Denison University, which is a small liberal arts college that is replicated after a lot of these East Coast liberal arts schools, like the Colbys of the world, and the other Bates and schools like that. It was about 2,000 students, and I went there not really knowing what I was getting myself into. That was the first time I saw snow. That was the first time I met someone from New York or Boston or Chicago, and I think it all kind of started there. Long story short, I'm an introvert. I don't really get energy from being in large crowds. I like being by myself. I get energy from myself. And being in that small environment allowed me to grow into myself and grow out of my shell. And a lot of people were from Boston. And some of those students are still friends today. But, the opportunities and the economic opportunities that seem to be in Massachusetts, coupled with my desire to go to graduate school, made sense for me to come to Boston. I get to Boston. This is 2006, 2007. I want to be a professor of religion. My dad was a minister. My grandfather was a minister in Arkansas way back in, I don't know, early 1900s. And so I thought I was going to be a professor of religion. If anyone that's listening to this knows what it's like to get a PhD, it is very difficult. It's one of the hardest things that you can possibly do. A lot of time in a study carrel, a lot of time focused on one specific issue. What do I mean by that? So I'm at Harvard Divinity School, one of the best divinity schools in the world. And you're at Grafton Street in Cambridge, if you know where that is. Some of you listening to this, and you go and you're sitting down talking to someone. Someone from the business school says, "Oh, I'm in business school. What do you do?" And I say, "Well, I'm studying early Christian history from 1997 to 2007." No one cares. People do care, but it's a very small group of people. And so I got the sense early on that I wanted to do something else. I wanted to kind of expand outside of my shell. I tried to get a job in 2008. You know how this story goes, right? So people are looking at my resume, and it's always funny today when I hear people say, "Wow, you have such a unique background." Because back then, what I heard was, "You don't want to work because you have a liberal arts degree, you have a divinity degree, and you're about to you don't want to work. We want someone who's gone a specific path." So needless to say, I didn't find a job, and I actually ended up going to law school at Northeastern. And they have a wonderful co-op program, which I'm sure all of you that are listening to this in Massachusetts know about. But essentially, you get the opportunity to work at a company over the course. I guess by the time you're finished with school, it's a full year of experience. That was where I got my first startup experience. And so in 2011 or 2012, I got an opportunity to be an intern at a company called Custom Made, which some of you may have heard about. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, Matt, but Custom Made is a marketplace company, very similar to Etsy, but larger ticket items. So Etsy, you'll get, Justin Bieber necklace for $5. Custom Made, you'll get a oak coffee table for like 10 grand, right? And it was a great experience. It was a two-sided marketplace where people who made things that were very unique were able to sell to people who wanted them. So you get people from like Michigan selling to people in New York, and vice versa. It was a fantastic experience. Part of that experience, I got to see the fundraising process. So they had to raise a Series A, and I got to meet a lot of the investors, do work on the pitch decks, and that's how I knew I was interested in venture at first. The conversations were interesting, and it reminded me of my liberal arts education. And so I said, "How do I get into venture?" And then everyone said, "Well, you either go as an entrepreneur, so you create your own company, or you work in an early stage startup, or you go a more traditional route, which is, tell me if you've heard this before. You graduate from college, you work at Bain for 2 years, you get an MBA at Harvard or Penn or Yale. After that, then you can get into a private equity firm." So I have already plenty of education at that point. So I decided to go the startup route and the technology route. And that's kind of how it started. So basically, I did, Custom Made. I went from there to Log Me In. Log Me In was already public at that point, but I got some experience selling. And then from Log Me In, I went over to Ativio, which is a data analytics firm, and they actually were recently acquired by ServiceNow. Fantastic experience. And then after Ativio, I was at Ovia Health, which is the women's digital health company that helps women determine when's the right time to try and start a family. And they have a fertility tracker and a pregnancy tracker and a parenting tracker that helps you track the progress of your child. But all those experiences gave me the operational experience that I needed, I think, to get into venture. And I had been trying to get into venture or learning more about how one gets into venture. And someone told me that there's more openings in the NFL than there were in venture. And so essentially, I just tried to find a way to network my way in. I'll stop here before I go any further, Matt. Should I keep?
No, this was amazing. I think it would be cool to it seems like each step of the way was like this significant transition, right? Like every time it was like this completely new environment. So it would be interesting to understand how much of that was kind of I guess fate and falling into place, and how much of that was you seeking them out, and how did you know at each step of the way that this was the move to make, or did you just kind of make that leap of faith, so to say, and just kind of take the jump?
Okay, that's a good question. So I think it was two parts. One was in 2011 or 2012, I knew that venture was interesting. And when I did research on it at that time, it didn't look like I could get in because, again, we're living in a world at that time where things are a little bit more traditional. And and Matt, you're too young for this, but when I was in college, it's like econ major, Bain, business school, go work at International Paper. Like that, that's what you did. And so the idea of getting into venture at that time was like, well, that would be really cool if I did it. And I went on to the websites to look at the associates and analysts, and they all had that background. And so I was okay. It's like, oh, maybe that's not for me, but tech looks interesting. Maybe I could be an entrepreneur. And so I think it started with that. And as the years had gone by, I would say probably not at Log Me In, not at it, but at Ativio, I would say I started to say, oh, the world started to change a little bit. There were people who were starting funds that had zero experience in venture. There were entrepreneurs who started funds, and thought, okay, well, maybe there's an opportunity for me to do that. And then I started to focus on it. I would say probably in late 2016, early 2017, and I think I was at Ovia at that time. I was like, oh, maybe I could get into venture at some point after this. So it was an iterative process. It was the world was changing along with career prospects changing, and Boston started to really. I mean, it was always a tech, tech center, but I feel like it became more democratized.
And I don't know, hopefully this isn't kind of like cliche, but I guess it's like as the world is changing, you want to position yourself to ride whatever waves are working. And maybe there's a lesson in there for, the young professionals and college students right now that are witnessing everything that's going on, with COVID.
Yeah, I agree. I think the world has been changing. I think, and it's been accelerated this past year, obviously, between everything that's happened, right? What I saw happening was, and I don't know if this was true or not, but it felt like Boston and Massachusetts was going through an economic boom. I was not able to get a job anywhere, but I got a job at Log Me In with no tech experience, with nothing. I was an entry level salesperson. Like they couldn't hire people fast enough. And so I feel like there was a time, and there still is a time, but like, being a sales rep, at that time was the wave that I was kind of riding, and you could kind of make a living for yourself that way. A lot of those people ended up going on in angel investing because they had a couple good years or whatever. And so you started to see a little bit of shift to that. I think I can't quite put my finger on it, but I would say probably sometime in the last 4 or 5 years or so, there have been people who have made investments that were very successful that didn't have the typical background of an investor. So you started to see more writing around like, people who are operators, how good are they good investors, or people who are have been investing their whole life, are they good investors? So you saw a little bit of a change there. For me, what I thought was changing was more opportunities at the seed stage. So I created a spreadsheet of, where were my opportunities and where would I be a good fit. So I just took a look at it. It was like, okay, could I go to private equity? Maybe, but I would need to have an MBA. I would need to have some very hard, analysis skills that I was able to develop, but CFA level kind of like serious analysis. Looking at my age, I was like, oh, I was probably a little too old to be an associate or an analyst at a PE firm. If somebody's looking at me and they're looking at somebody else, like, okay, well, chances are if I do that, that'll be significantly later in my career. And then you look at the seed stage and it's like, okay, well, if you have experience at early stage companies, which I did, helping them go to market, helping them sell, whether it was custom made or angel investing, um, and there are pockets of these firms popping up all over the place, that's where the opportunity is. And I think that is kind of the wave that I feel like I rode that gave me at least an opportunity in an interview at launch and at MassVentures. Because I think if you look at my background, you're like, well, not an econ major. Um, you didn't, work at a startup for 10 years that exited. Like, what is it that you bring? It's like, okay, well, you worked in all these early stage companies from like the seed all the way through Series A. So you kind of have a little niche. And there were opportunities at that time where that's where investment and being able to support companies at that stage would be helpful.
And I imagine for a lot of the listeners, that is probably one of the primary paths. They obviously Series A and later funds, they have a lot more capital, so they can hire a lot more people. Like Greenspring had a ton of capital, so they could hire a lot more analysts than a seed fund can. But now so many seed and pre-seed funds are sprouting up that for a lot of the listeners, I imagine that's kind of still the wave to go after.
It is, and I think you learn about how to be conversant in the language of venture. And there's so many resources now. Again, there weren't all these podcasts and all these like websites that you can go on YouTube and kind of get a sense of how it works. Now, there's things that you and I both know now that there's no way you can get it on like a blog or going to a class about it. It's just experience. These are things that happen in text messages, phone calls. Like you can't get that. And I think that is there's still an apprenticeship piece to it. But in terms of getting into a pre-seed or seed stage firm, I think it's possible. I think you have to find out what you're most interested in, and really, take a deep dive into it and really understand it and try to make that work. For me, sales and marketing was the thing that I was able to do because I didn't have a specific back. I couldn't be an engineer. I couldn't be a product person. So it was like, all right, you can do sales and marketing. So I did that. And just you need that in an early stage firm. You need to figure out how to do that. And I think that was how I was able to help companies, early on.
And going back to the journey that you took, how did you get to launch? How did that happen? And then also kind of same thing with getting to MassVentures. Like, how did that happen?
What a great question. So I had been trying to get into venture for a while. Not a while, I would say. I made my mind up that at some point I want to be in venture. I don't, it was 16, 17. I was like, how do I get there? Like, okay, we'll continue to get experience. And basically, I started to network like crazy. I have a spreadsheet of everyone that I've ever met with. And I started networking in probably January, February of 2017, just like informational, like, hey, how did you get, what is the path? What is the path for you? How did it work? And then each of those people I had them introduce me to three more people. And so the list is pretty long and they're all fantastic, wonderful people. So I did that for over a year. And
And
then,
you were literally saying to each one, like, thank you. Could you do 3 intros after this if you're able to?
well, no, not like, well, it's just not like that. Obviously it's more like, thanks so much for your time. If there's anyone else you think I should talk to, you know,
Mm, okay.
uh, please let me know. And then, keep those people abreast of what's going on. And I just had a great, just experience talking to different people, and you just learn so much. It also helped me at my job. It's like, wow, okay, so this is why this is important. This is why when you present something at the board and they care about that particular thing, so that was really, really interesting. And this is obviously all outside of work and, you know, Saturdays and late nights. So this is over the course of a year. So my mind was like, I'll get in, try to get in. It was late 16. I began networking in January of 17. A year and about 3 or 4 months into networking and just kind of making my way across. Um, One of the partners at Launch Capital put out something on LinkedIn saying they're looking for a part-time associate, and I immediately responded on LinkedIn. Um, and I said, listen, I have a job and I'm going to do that. I'm committed to that job, but I will work nights and weekends and any time outside of that uh, to do this job. If it's part time, happy to, I want to do it. And met with them, and they said yes. So it worked out for them because they didn't need someone that could do full time, like be that needed a lot of oversight. I already had experience in tech and software and startups, and it just worked out really, really well. It was a wonderful experience, and they're great people. But it was through LinkedIn.
That's amazing. And then what about finding MassVentures? How did that happen?
So while I was at launch, they just it was networking basically. So I knew that there was an opportunity coming up with MassVentures, and people who were that knew me through all of my networking in the year prior just kind of found its way to me. Basically, it's like, hey, this might be interesting to you, and so um, I went through that process, which about all about.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So I think we've hit on some of it, but the practical advice for the young professional or the college student watching this that wants to break into these roles, on networking, finding the passion, the internships, the job hunting, kind of all of that. If there's anything else that you would want to add outside of the general kind of networking and hustle that we described.
I think keeping detailed notes. Um, I This is the first time I've ever admitted this, but I have a basically a bullet point kind of Google Doc, everything related to my VC career from the time that I made my first angel investment, anything related to like VC, and including the networking, including the conversations, and I just keep track of it. Um, if you can do that, you can always go back and reference it because your mind plays tricks on you. So like, oh yeah, I remember I spoke to Matt Snow and I said this, and like you go back a year later and it's like I didn't say that at all. Like, or that's not what I was told. So it's just good to keep track and to set goals for yourself. So I said, I think this is my sales and marketing background, but it's just kind of like, hey, I need to talk to 10 people about venture in California this quarter. How do I do that? And then it's like, I need to talk to 10 people in venture in New York next quarter. And he's, so on and on and on and on. Those are the two things for me, because if you keep that running tally or keep track of it somehow, whether it's a bullet point list or if you just kind of write about it, then it'll motivate you to want to keep going and stay in. So I would say that my total journey from the time that, and I count launch, but MassVentures is like a full-time VC job. Um, so I would say like from the time that I started in earnest trying until I actually got a role would be, January of 17. And then I started working in October of 18.
It's a long
Yeah,
time.
so be ready for that, right?
Yeah. And then I guess another thing I just thought of is, how do you think about like following up with people without being kind of overbearing on them? And I think it's like, that's a tough thing that I still feel like there's not enough content on how to actually handle that aspect of networking.
From a career perspective, following up with people, um, I think you just follow. I mean, you just follow up with them, and you set a cadence, but you have to make it relevant. So, like, if I was going to follow up with you, um, I don't know what types of them, but assuming you're interested in something in particular, I could, and I come across it organically. Like I'm reading an article about how, Elon named a statue after Matt Snow. I could email you and say, hey, I just saw this really interesting article. Hope you're well. Would love to catch up again. I think finding a relevant piece of content as a follow up that tells you that you're not just sending a form email to like 100 people, but you're actually thinking about that person is helpful. And the worst thing that happens is they don't get back to you. Fine.
Right. Yeah, I guess some of this, I guess it does go back to kind of sales and marketing, right? It's you're thinking about the psychology of who you're targeting and how to make them feel like, how to make them feel good when you're reaching out to them and how to make them want to continue to engage with you.
Right. Because you have to think, when I was doing my networking, there were dozens and dozens of other people who wanted to get into the industry that were also reaching out to these people. So how do you stand out? Like you have to be specific.
Definitely. So, I would like to find out, what is it about, I guess we've touched on some of this, but what is it about venture that drew you in? And then what is it, additional things on what drew you into kind of early stage investing?
Two things. One is the diversity of thought around different industries, right? Obviously, again, one day we're talking to a robotics company, another day we're talking to some sort of a, food processing automation company. I love that. I think that goes back to like the divinity school experience. The liberal arts education I had where you learn different things. To me, that's number one. That's always interesting and exciting. I love to do a deep dive on an industry or an area. The seed stage, I feel like you are just so close to the investor. I think the relationships that you develop over time, for me, I think are very valuable. And you're the first person one of the first institutional folks on the journey with them. Um, and it's just, I think that relationship is special. Now, I've never been on the later stages. I'm assuming that's also the case as well. But you know, there are seed stage investors that have deep relationships with companies that they were the first check-in that ended up IPOing. And it's like, you love that piece. On the flip side, for people that are listening out there, um, if you're going to invest at the seed stage, you have a longer time horizon to exit. So just something to keep in mind if you know you're thinking about different stages.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot of unexpected ups and downs with the companies, and it might take a lot longer before you reap any rewards from deploying some capital.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think this transitions great into this next question, which is, what is kind of the impact you want to have in the world? What do you most want to see changed by the founders, and what do you want kind of your life impact to be on others? I guess both professionally and to some extent personally.
All right. What was the first one? Is impact on.
Impact that you want to have on the world, and then that's
Okay.
kind of like what you want to see from the founders, maybe the founders you're supporting, and then kind of
Sure.
like what you want to directly be from you.
Well, obviously, diversity and inclusion is very important to me. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to get into the industry. I feel that like that is a part of the future, and not just in a kind of not politically, but I mean economically. The more people that you can get to generate wealth for themselves and their family, the better off I think we all are in the long run. I think that's going to be critical as we go in the next couple of decades. So to me, I think I really want to have an impact in that area, whether it's mentoring or investing. And then the second was impact on.
Kind of like a direct life impact. So I guess the difference is like what you want to see in like the ecosystem, and then what you want to directly be like from your work.
Um, I think more of that. I mean, it would be great to see more diverse founders and leadership teams, and for me to be a driving catalyst for that in whatever way that I can. At the earliest stage, you can start having those dialogues. I love talking to founders and saying, "How do you think about this?" I think that is important. Um, you know, that's really the big thing for me right now, and as a big part of my career goal is to, I want to be able to invest in a company that is led by a woman or person of color, that IPOs or gets acquired for a lot of money and creates a new ecosystem the way that people have, like the former founders of or early employees of HubSpot or DraftKings, like generating prosperity that way. So I hope that can happen. So we'll see.
It sounds like generational prosperity and kind of the rising tide lifts all boats that we were mentioning before. And we talked about what makes the mass ecosystem so strong. I guess if we can, collectively as a society lift up kind of upper underrepresented business leaders and founders and leadership teams, we have no idea how many positive ripple effects into the future that can create and new ecosystems it can build.
Yes, and I will leave the listeners with this just to kind of tie all this back together. I am a product of school busing. So I went to an elementary school in a different neighborhood than the one that I grew up in. School lunch program, and a lot of different things, whether it's from corporate folks, whether like scholarships or government folks, that is giving me an opportunity for my kids. And I think that if you can do that from a venture perspective, it really does. I think it just changes the outlook long term. And it's hard to think about that right now because we all have the things that we're focused on. But just in terms of my life story, which is obviously much longer than the time that I've been in Boston, it's I always think about like, well, what if I didn't have that opportunity, or what if I didn't have this opportunity? My life would turn out completely differently. And so that is how I think about venture, if we can find some of these companies. Now I invest in everybody, but I'm just saying that's something that's I'm passionate about.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point, and I really enjoyed the conversation so far. Do you have time to do some of these rapid fire questions
Yeah,
quick?
I mean, I know I don't want to take up too much of your time, but yeah, sure.
So, quick one is, who has been one of your most important mentors?
I would say Woody Benson, um, of Launch Capital. He is just someone that I would do almost anything for as long as it's legal. He has just been very helpful in teaching me venture, teaching me how to do analysis, developing relationships. I think he's awesome.
That's awesome. What is one of your favorite VCs like outside of MassVentures?
Favorite VCs outside of MassVentures. I don't know. I think A lot of them are all really good. I mean, I really like Founder Collective. I really like Accomplice. I don't. I mean, all of them.
So many.
It sounds political, but how can you choose one? They're all great. They're all great.
What about what are the characteristics that you look for in the startups that you like?
Oh man, the passion of the founder, the founder's journey, and then if there is a technical and a business person. Those are like three things immediately that I look for. So I over index for people who have a journey and a story that's like, I spent time doing this, I spent time doing that, and I really found something here that I think that we can latch onto, compared to someone's like, oh, this seems like pretty cool, it needs to be fixed. Like that dynamic, and you can kind of hear it in the pitch is important to me. And then I just like to see, it's just, I think it's a team sport. I think having people who can play off of each other is important. It's not essential, but I think that's what I look for. And then obviously the passion, right? So is this somebody just trying to make some money, or they really think they're onto something? Those are the three things that I look for.
And then last rapid fire is, what are some of the top, books that you've enjoyed, or venture blogs or podcasts, or some of the content?
Yeah. So there's a podcast called Origins. It is by, I can't remember the name of the firm, but basically it talks about venture LPs. Um, and they have a different LP on every week. And it's just really fascinating to hear how venture capitalists talk about how they raise money. I think that's really fascinating. Of course, the full ratchet 20-minute VC. I think everybody, if you are interested in venture, you should be listening to those. And then I also think that venture requires some curiosity. So you try to get outside the box as much as you can. I listen to like Bloomberg, so like that's not venture at all, but it tells me about the economy and the markets. And then I also like mystery podcasts too. So
It's nice.
yeah.
Okay, this is a really fun one. I stole this from Tim Ferriss on his podcast. What's a purchase of like $100 or like a couple hundred that has had a really outsized impact of like joy in your life?
Oh wow, that's a good one. Over $100 that has had an outside. Um, well, it has to be with stuff for my kids. So it's like one of his sleep sacks, and Matt, you don't know about this, but getting a kid to sleep, you have to. It's very hard early on, and these things that help like wrap up the baby when they're very young. I don't know if it was $100 actually, but that was the most important purchase in the first like 6 months of his life. So that gave me a great deal of joy. And I honestly, I can't think of can't think of anything else. It's probably because I've been in code for so long that it's like I'm just at home. There's nothing that I can that other than, like my subscriptions to like Hulu and stuff, and that's not over $100.
Unsurprisingly, I've had a lot of people say like, "Oh, the AirPods, I can't live without them." And, like,
Oh,
but it's kind of true once you go wireless. But no, it sounds like it was night and day with getting your son to sleep with that product. So
it
sounds
was
like
literally night and
definitely.
day. Yeah, you've seen meetings we've been on.
Oh yeah. Last one. Promote yourself. Where can people find you? Twitter, LinkedIn, email, social media, all that stuff.
This is so funny to me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I don't have a follow. I mean, I need to work on that or think about that more. You can find me on the MassVentures website. That's where you can find me.
That's a great one. Well, Jason, really appreciate the time. This has been a super fun episode, and I think you had an awesome origin story and great advice for listeners as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Looking to innovate, invent, and disrupt? We're your partner to fuel your growth. Contact us to learn more.